Following the overthrow of Robespierre and the end of the Terror, a reaction took place among those opposed to revolutionary government. A new system was created, the Directory, which, although the longest lasting of the regimes created during the Revolution, was also in the end replaced. This period is examined as three themes: the Thermidorian reaction, the Directory, and the Coup of Brumaire and the overthrow of the Directory. There was great popular outburst of delight and relief when Robespierre was executed. Those who helped to overthrow Robespierre were known as Thermidorians, after the month of Thermidor, when the coup occurred. The Thermidorians were a mixed group, members of the two great committees, the CPS and the CGS, ex-terrorists, and deputies of the Plain. The Plain now emerged from obscurity to take control. They were the men who had gained from the revolution by buying land or by obtaining government contracts. As regicides, these men were firmly attached to the Republic and did not want to see a return to monarchy, even a constitutional one. They also disliked the Jacobins, who had given too much power to the sans-culottes and had interfered with a free market through the maximum laws. For them, popular democracy, anarchy, and the terror were synonymous. These men were joined by the Montagnards, who had rejected their former views and values. The convention now set about dismantling the machinery of the terror. They abolished the Revolutionary Tribunal, following the execution of a further 63 people, including some who had been leading terrorists. They released all suspects from prison, and they repealed the law of Prairial and closed the Jacobin Club. The Thermidorians also decided to deal with the religious issues by renouncing the Constitutional Church. In September 1794, the convention decided that it would no longer pay clerical salaries. This brought about for the first time the separation of church and state. In February 1795, the government restored freedom of worship for all religions and thereby formally ended the persecution of religions waged during the terror by the de-Christianization campaign. State recognition of the cult of the Supreme Being was also ended. For the first time in a major European country, the state was declaring itself to be entirely neutral in all matters of religious faith, in that it would not favor one belief to the exclusion of others. The consequence of this was that refractory and constitutional priests, Protestants, and Jews would be free in competition for popular support. The Thermidorians wanted to get rid of price controls, partly because of their support for a free market and partly because it was considered to be unenforceable. These were abolished in December 1794. Public arms workshops were closed or restored to private ownership. The removal of price controls led to a fall in the value of money and massive inflation. The government now had to buy its own war materials at market prices. It therefore decided to print more money to pay for them. In August 1794, before the maximum was abolished, money was rising so fast that it lost all value. The situation was made worse by a poor harvest in 1794. Grain shortages led to huge increase in the price of bread. The winter of 1794 and 95 was unlike any before. It was a very severe one. Rivers froze and factories closed down. A combination of economic collapse and the bitter cold produced an enormous increase in miseries, suicides, and death from malnutrition as scarcity turned into famine. The Thermidorians wanted a new constitution which would guarantee the main features of the Revolution of 1789, the abolition of privilege, freedom of the individual, and the control of local and national affairs by an elected assembly and elected officials. They also wanted to ensure that a dictatorship like that of the CPS would be impossible in the future, and that there would be no return to monarchy or to popular sovereignty on the sans-culotte model. The main features of the new constitution were all males over 21 who paid direct taxation were allowed to vote in the primary assemblies to choose electors. Real power, however, was exercised by the electors who actually chose deputies. Electors had to pay taxes equivalent to 150 to 200 days of labor. This was so high that the number of electors had fallen from 50,000 to 30,000. Electors were therefore the very rich. In order to prevent a dictatorship arising, the Thermidorians rigidly separated the legislature from the executive. The legislature was divided into two chambers, the Council of 500, all of whom had to be over the age of 30. This council would initiate legislation and then pass it on to the Council of Ancients. The second chamber was the Council of Ancients, 250 men over 40 who would approve or object to bills but could not introduce or change them. There was no property qualification for the councillors of either chambers. Elections were to be held every year when a third of the members retired. The executive was to be a directory of 5 chosen by the ancients from a list drawn up by the 500. The 5 directors would hold office for 5 years, though one, chosen by random lot, had to retire each year. Directors were not allowed to be members of either council, and their powers were limited. They could not initiate or veto laws or declare war, and they had no control over the treasury. Yet they had considerable authority, as they were in charge of diplomacy, military affairs, and law enforcement. Ministers, who also could not sit in the councils, were appointed by and responsible to the directors, as were government commissioners who replaced the representatives on mission and national agents and saw that government policy was implemented in the provinces. In spite of the complex system of checks and balances designed to prevent a dictatorship, the new constitution had many weaknesses. The yearly elections promoted instability. There was no means of resolving conflicts between the legislature and the executive. The councils could paralyze the directory by refusing to pass laws. The directors could neither dissolve the councils nor veto laws passed by them. And the legislature was not in a strong position either if it clashed with the executive. The new constitution enforced quite rigidly the separation of powers. If a hostile majority dominated the legislature, then the Constitution allowed it to paralyze the directory. As the directory was unable to dissolve the legislature or veto any laws, it came to rely on unconstitutional methods such as canceling election returns and calling in the army to resolve disputes. As discussions about the proposed constitution were nearing an end, the Royalists sought to promote their cause. Constitutional monarchs wanting a return to a limited monarchy similar to that in 1791 Constitution felt that they were gaining public support as they appeared to offer a prospect of stability. They had hoped to put Louis XVI's son, a prisoner in the Temple, on the throne, but he died in June 1795. From northern Italy, the Comte de Provence, Louis XVI's brother, immediately proclaimed himself Louis XVIII, and on June 24th issued the Verona Declaration. The declaration, however, turned out to be a reactionary document, which made the task of restoring the monarchy more difficult. And the Verona Declaration failed to attract mass support for the Royalist cause. In October 1795, though, a large Royalist crowd of 25,000 gathered to march on the convention and seize power. They greatly outnumbered the 7,800 government troops. but the latter had cannon under the command of General Napoleon Bonaparte, whereas the rebels did not. The devastating artillery fire, Bonaparte's famous whiff of grape shot, crushed the rebellion. As over 300 were killed or wounded in the fighting, this was one of the bloodiest events of the Revolution. The repression that followed this uprising was light. Only 2 people were executed, although steps were taken to prevent further risings. The sectional assemblies were abolished and the National Guard was put under the control of the new General of the Army of the Interior, Napoleon Bonaparte. For the second time in 6 months, the army have saved the Thermidorian Republic. Napoleon Bonaparte was born into a minor noble family on the island of Corsica, which had only been a part of France since 1768. He entered a military academy and rose up pretty quickly to an artillery officer when he's going to involve himself within the revolution and continue to rise up. By 1796, he's appointed commander of the army in Italy. He negotiates the Peace of Campo Formino and sets off on an Egyptian campaign by 1798. In 1799, he's invited to participate in a coup and eagerly agrees, where he's then appointed first consul. He's proclaimed Emperor of France by 1804, but by 1815, he's been defeated at Waterloo and exiled to St. Helena. The emergence of Napoleon as one of the ablest and most popular generals during the Directory is one of the key features of the Revolution. His use by the Directory to resolve political disputes made him aware of how weak the system was. When invited to join a coup to overthrow the Directory, he agreed willingly. Because of Napoleon's quick thinking, the Thermidorians and the convention was saved, but also as a result, now the government relied upon the military to rule. The new third of members elected to the Council of 500 after the uprisings and the dissolution of the convention was mainly royalist, but they were unable to influence the choice of directors. As the Verona Declaration had threatened to punish all regicides, the convention elected directors that were moderates, all of whom were also regicides, as this would be a guarantee against a royalist restoration. The directors wanted to provide a stable and liberal government which would maintain the gains of the revolution, yet the problems they faced were daunting. The war appeared to be endless and it had to be paid for. The treasury was empty, taxes were unpaid, money had plummeted in value. Many Frenchmen did not expect the Directory to last more than a few months. The Directory did, however, survive, and for longer than any other revolutionary regime. There are a number of factors as to why. The Directory was committed to restoring the rule of law. Many of their key opponents were discredited. While many ordinary people were prepared to accept a constitutional monarchy with little powers, the royalists themselves were deeply divided. Also, public apathy also helped the Directory to survive. After 6 years of revolution and 3 years of war, revolutionary enthusiasm had all but disappeared. But most significantly, the army supported the Directory, as a royalist restoration would mean an end to the war. Army officers did not wish to be deprived of any opportunity provided by war for the promotion of plunder. It was the army above all that enabled the Directory to overcome all challenges to its authority. But this was a double-edged weapon. The army, which kept the Directory in power, would be the most serious threat to its survival if it became dissatisfied. The war in Belgium was over by June 1794, and this was just the first of a series of successes which continued until all the members of the first coalition, except for Great Britain, had been knocked out of the war. Belgium was occupied, and in the following winter, the United Provinces of Netherlands was invaded. The French conquered the Rhineland and crossed into Spain. Russia had intervened in Poland, which it was clear would be partitioned again. Prussia therefore made peace with France so that she would be free to claim Polish territory for herself. This, in reality, made very little difference, as Prussia had played only a minimal part in the war against France since 1793. A treaty with Prussia freed French troops to attack other enemies. Meanwhile, the United Provinces of the Netherlands had become the Batavian Republic in January 1795 after a revolt against William V, who fled to England. Having lost Prussian support, the Dutch hastily made peace with France, who they were then forced to join as an ally. The French hoped that having the Dutch powerful navy would help to tip the naval balance against Great Britain. Spain too made peace in July, giving up to France her part of the island of San Domingo. Of the great powers, only Great Britain and Austria remained in the fight against France. In 1796, the main French objective was to defeat Austria. Carnot drew up the plan of campaign and prepared a pincer movement against Austria. Armies would then march across Bavaria to Vienna, whilst the armies of the Alps in Italy would conquer Piedmont and Lombardy and then move across the Alps to Vienna. The main attack was to be led by Jourdan and Moreau, who were giving 140,000 troops. Command of the Italian campaign was given to the 27-year-old General Napoleon Bonaparte in March of 1796. It was expected that he would play a secondary role, as he had no field experience and only 30,000 unpaid and ill-disciplined troops under his command. Yet Napoleon was to turn Italy into the major battleground against Austria. He was able to do this by winning the loyalty of his men, to whom he promised vast wealth. Napoleon decided the terms at Louvain without consulting the Directory. He was already confident enough to be making his own foreign policy, and in doing so ignoring specific instructions from the directors. They had wanted to use Lombardy as a bargaining counter when negotiating with Austria to exchange for recognition of French control of the left bank of the Rhine. Instead, Napoleon joined Lombardy to Modena and the papal legations to form the Cisalpine Republic. Austria recognized Belgium, which the French had annexed in October 1795, as French territory. As compensation for giving up Lombardy and Belgium, Napoleon gave Austria Venice and part of the Venetian Republic, which provided access to the Adriatic. The fate of the left bank of the Rhine was unclear. It was to be decided by a Congress of the Holy Roman Empire. The Directory and the generals on the Rhine were furious that they had no choice but to accept what Napoleon had done. As the Royalists had won the elections in France, the Directory knew it might need him. The Peace of Campo Formino in October of 1797 confirmed what had been agreed to by Napoleon. With her major allies out of the war, Britain was now isolated. The French wanted to invade Britain, but for this to happen, control of the seas was necessary in order to ensure safe passage for an invasion army. In particular, they wanted to support Irish nationalists in their attempt to overthrow British rule in Ireland. Control of the sea was also vital if the French hoped to send an army expedition to Ireland. The French hoped that with the aid of the Dutch and the Spanish fleets, they would be able to obtain this. These plans were dashed by two British victories in 1797. In February, the Spanish fleet was defeated, and the Dutch fleet was almost completely destroyed in October. The war with Britain therefore continued. On the continent, the prospects for a permanent peace receded. French foreign policy became increasingly aggressive as the directors sought to keep French conquests and even extend them. France reorganized a number of foreign territories, effectively redrawing the map of Europe in some areas. These new territories were in effect satellite republics under French influence or control. The spring of 1798 marked the high point of the Republic's power. In Western, Central, and Southern Europe, France had attained a degree of hegemony unparalleled in modern European history. Yet from this position of great external strength, the decline in the Directory's fortunes was equally dramatic. Within 18 months, it would be overthrown. Following his successes in Italy, Napoleon departed for Egypt in May of 1798 with the aim of attacking British interests. His fleet, however, was destroyed by Admiral Nelson at the Battle of Abu Kar Bay in August of 1798. This defeat encouraged other countries to once again take up arms against France. A second coalition was formed, and Russia, which had not taken part in the previous fighting against France, declared war in December. Tsar Paul of Russia was incensed at the French seizure of Malta, of which he had declared himself a protector in 1797. France declared war on Austria in March of 1799 on the grounds that Austria had allowed Russian troops to move through her territory. Immediately, war resumed. France occupied the rest of Italy, and Piedmont was annexed to France, and Naples was turned into another sister republic. These early successes were followed by a series of defeats. One of the 5 directors, Sieyès, decided that since the military situation had improved, it was time to stage a coup and increase the power of the executive branch. But in order to do so, he needed the military. So he chose Napoleon Bonaparte to be the face of the military, and Napoleon easily and readily agreed. As a result, Sieyès wanted to move the councils to St. Cloud, as the Jacobins in the 500 in Paris were numerous enough to provide opposition to his plans. The ancients, using as an excuse the fear of a plot, persuaded the councils to move to a safer location at St. Cloud. Once there, it became clear on November 10th that the only plot was one organized by Sieyès. The Council of 500 was furious, so Bonaparte reluctantly agreed to address both councils. The appearance of Napoleon in the 500 with armed grenadiers was greeted with cries of "Outlaw!" and "Down with the tyrant!" He was physically attacked by Jacobin deputies and had to be rescued by his fellow officers. It was not at all clear that the soldiers would take action against the elected representatives of the nation. But Napoleon's brother, Lucien, president of the 500, came to his rescue when he told the troops that some deputies were trying to assassinate their general. At this, the troops cleared the hall where the 500 were meeting. Some hours later, a small group of councilors sympathetic to the plotters met and approved a decree abolishing the Directory. It was replaced with a provincial executive committee of 3 members: Sieyès, Roger Ducos, and Napoleon. The great beneficiary of this November coup was Napoleon, but it was his brother who was the true hero of the hour. Napoleon issued a proclamation to the French nation on November 1799 to explain why he had taken part in the coup. On my return to Paris, I found all authority in chaos and agreement only on the one truth that the Constitution was half destroyed and incapable of preserving liberty. Men of every party came to see me, confided their plans, disclosed their secrets, and asked for my support. I refused to be a man of party. As a result, Paris remained calm, but this was a sign of apathy and reluctance to become involved in any more protest rather than approval. When news of the coup spread to the provinces, there was little rejoicing at the events. Such reaction as there was varied between surprise and mild opposition. A poster that appeared in Paris expressed the disillusionment many felt towards the Directory. France wants something great and long-lasting. Instability has been her downfall. She has no desire for a monarchy, wants a free and independent legislature, and to enjoy the benefits from 10 years of sacrifices. When Napoleon presented the new Constitution of the year 8 to the French people on the 15th of December 1799, he said that it was founded on the true principles of representative government, on the sacred rights of property, equality, and liberty. Citizens, the revolution is established on the principles which it began. It is finished. Many did not realize the significance of the Coup of Brumaire or the Coup of November. The Republican phase of the revolution was drawing to a close, while another, destined to culminate in the Napoleonic Empire, was just beginning.